Could it be possible that we are on the verge of the next Lehman Brothers moment? Deutsche Bank is the most important bank in all of Europe. It has $49 trillion in exposure to derivatives, and most of the largest too-big-to-fail banks in the United States have very deep financial connections to the bank. In other words, the global financial system simply cannot afford for Deutsche Bank to fail. And right now, it is literally melting down right in front of our eyes. For years, I have been warning that this day would come, and even though it has been hit by scandal after scandal, somehow Deutsche Bank was able to survive until now. But after what we've witnessed in recent days, many now believe that the end is near for Deutsche Bank. On July 7th, they really shook up investors all over the globe when they laid off 18,000 employees and announced that they would be completely exiting their global equities trading business. It takes a lot to rattle Wall Street, but Deutsche Bank managed to. The beleaguered German giant announced on July 7th that it's laying off 18,000 employees, roughly 1/5 of its global workforce, and pursuing a vast restructuring plan that most notably includes shutting down its global equities trading business. Though Deutsche's Bloody Sunday seemed to come out of the blue, it's actually the culmination of a years-long, some would say decades-long, descent into unprofitability and scandal for the bank, which in the early 1990s set out to make itself into a universal banking powerhouse to rival the behemoths of Wall Street. These moves may delay Deutsche Bank's inexorable march into oblivion, but not by much. And as Deutsche Bank collapses, it could take a whole lot of others down with it at the same time. According to Wall Street on Parade, the bank had $49 trillion in exposure to derivatives as of the end of last year. During 2018, the serially troubled Deutsche Bank, which still has a vast derivatives footprint in the US, as counterparty to some of the largest banks on Wall Street, trimmed its exposure to derivatives from a notional 48.266 trillion euro to a notional 43.459 trillion euro, which is the same as about 49 trillion US dollars, according to its 2018 annual report. A derivatives book of $49 trillion notional puts Deutsche Bank in the same league as the bank holding companies of US juggernauts JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Goldman Sachs, which logged in at $48 trillion, $47 and $42 trillion respectively at the end of December 2018, and that's according to the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, OCC. Deutsche Bank's feeble 10% reduction in mind-numbing derivatives stands in stark contrast to the reduction in Deutsche Bank's share price last year. On the first trading day of 2018, Deutsche Bank opened at $19.27. On the last trading day of the year, December 31st, 2018, Deutsche Bank closed at $8.15. That's a reduction in shareholder value of 58%. So what that did to Deutsche Bank's market capitalization was this: with 2,066,773,131 shares outstanding at both the start of the year and at the end of the year, shareholders lost an enormous $23 billion in market cap. In 2011, when the GAO released the list of the banks that had received the $16.1 trillion in secret loans from the Fed during the financial crisis, two other foreign banks ranked in the top 10 of those receiving this strange largesse from the U.S. Central Bank. The U.S. mega bank, Barclays, ranked number 5 with $868 billion in cumulative borrowings, and the Royal Bank of Scotland Group plc, also of the UK, ranked number 8 with $541 billion in revolving loans from the Fed. With those numbers in mind, now study this chart provided by the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, which issued subpoenas and took testimony from more than 700 witnesses. The chart lists Goldman Sachs derivatives counterparties as of June 2008 and the dollar amount of exposure. Between Deutsche Bank, Barclays, and the Royal Bank of Scotland, Goldman had a cumulative derivatives exposure to just those three foreign banks of $7.2 trillion notional face amount. The actual credit risk to Deutsche Bank is much, much lower than the notional value of its derivatives contracts, but we are still talking about an obscene amount of exposure. And this is especially true when we consider the state of Deutsche Bank's balance sheet. According to Nasdaq.com, at the end of last year, the bank had total assets of $1.541 trillion and total liabilities of $1.469 trillion. In other words, there wasn't much equity there at the end of December, and things have deteriorated rapidly since that time. In fact, it's being reported that $1 billion a day is being pulled out of the bank at this point. I know that most Americans don't really care if Deutsche Bank lives or dies, but as the New York Post has pointed out, the failure of Deutsche Bank could quickly become a major crisis for the entire global financial system. But the important fact to remember is that Deutsche Bank traded these derivatives with other financial firms. So, this is going to be another Lehman Brothers situation whereby one bank's problems becomes another bank's problems. Pay close attention to this. If the situation gets out of hand, the Federal Reserve and other central banks will have no choice but to cut interest rates, even if it's not the best thing for the world economies. In particular, some of the largest too-big-to-fail banks in the United States are heavily interconnected financially to Deutsche Bank. The following comes from Wall Street on Parade. We know that Deutsche Bank's derivative tentacles extend into most of the major Wall Street banks. According to a 2016 report from the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, Deutsche Bank is heavily interconnected financially to JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Bank of America, as well as the other mega banks in Europe. The IMF concluded that Deutsche Bank posed a greater threat to global financial stability than any other bank as a result of these interconnections, and that was when its market capitalization was tens of billions of dollars larger than it is today. Until these mega banks are broken up, until the Fed is replaced by a competent and serious regulator of bank holding companies, and until derivatives are restricted to those that trade on a transparent exchange, the next epic financial crash is just one counterparty blow-up away. Goldman is just one investment bank. Add in the derivatives exposure to these foreign banks by Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, and one can begin to understand why the Federal Reserve wanted to keep its $16.1 trillion in revolving loans to both domestic and foreign banks a big secret from the American people. That's because the Federal Reserve is not just the U.S. central bank, but it's also the regulator of bank holding companies, which includes the largest banks on Wall Street. It had allowed this stockpile of financial weapons of mass destruction to grow exponentially in the years leading up to the 2008 Wall Street collapse. According to Phil Angelides, the chair of the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, the notional value of over-the-counter derivatives grew from $88 trillion in 1999 to $684 trillion in 2008, and it grew in a dark and mostly unregulated market. You know, as long as I've been doing this, I've been warning my readers to watch the global derivatives market. It played a starring role during the last financial crisis, and it will play a starring role in the next one too. The fundamental structural problems that were exposed during 2008 and 2009 were never fixed. In fact, many would argue that the global financial system is even more vulnerable today than it was back during that time. And now it appears that the next Lehman Brothers moment may be playing out right in front of our eyes. Now, more than ever, keep a close eye on Deutsche Bank, because it appears that they could be the first really big domino to fall.